My fingers trembled as I pressed save on the recording. Outside the window, fireworks were still exploding, one after another. Their booms made the delivery room windows rattle. Layla. Rose has never seen Disney fireworks. I'll bring her back right after we watch them. Can you stop faking stomach pain? Grant Voss's voice came through the receiver, impatient and faintly disgusted, as if he were dealing with a minor annoyance he'd long grown tired of. In the background, I could hear Rose's shrill cheers, and the endless roar of fireworks drowning out everything else. This was the 5th time I'd called him. First call, no answer. Second, he picked up, said he was driving. Third, he said he was almost there. Fourth, he said Rose was crying and he had to calm her down. Fifth, he asked what I was pretending for. I lay in a pool of blood, my water having broken and soaked the bed. A nurse held my hand down, telling me not to move, that I was losing too much blood, that we needed to notify my family to sign the consent form. I said okay into the phone. Grant, are the fireworks nice? I hung up. The nurse brought the surgery consent form, her hand shaking as she asked for my family's contact information. I said I didn't have any, I'd sign it myself. She hesitated, then handed me the pen. I signed Lila Hart in the blank space, turned on the recorder again, and slipped my phone under the pillow. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I stared at the white ceiling lights and thought about a lot of things. I thought about 3 years ago, when Grant knelt in front of me and proposed, saying, "Lila, marry me, I'll take care of you forever." I thought about our first prenatal appointment, when he held my hand and said he'd be the one to take care of the baby so I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I thought about last fall, when he brought Rose home and said she was just a kid from the orphanage, that she was a poor orphan and I should be kind to her. Then I thought about tonight. I'd called him 5 times. He'd picked up and asked what I was pretending for. A strange calm washed over me. Everything suddenly made sense. The surgery lasted 2 hours. The baby was a boy, with a loud, healthy cry. The nurse cleaned him off and laid him on my chest for a moment. I looked down at his wrinkled little face, his eyes still closed, soft and tiny. I remembered what Grant had said, "I'll take care of the baby myself." I stroked his small cheek and said nothing. Grant showed up at the hospital 6 hours after the baby was born. He pushed open the ward door, his face still carrying that giddy afterglow of the fireworks show. When he saw the baby, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. He strode over and reached out to hold him. I turned slightly, shielding the baby. "Layla." I looked up at him and said nothing. He paused, pulled a chair over, and sat down. His voice was low. "Good you had him. Good you're okay." I was busy today. Sorry I'm late." Grant was silent for a moment, then reached out and covered my hand with his. "Why aren't you talking?" I pulled my hand away and turned to look out the window. Nurses walked up and down the hallway outside, their footsteps light and quick. The fireworks had long since stopped. "Grant," I said, my voice steady as if I hadn't just given birth. "Go home. Rose is waiting for you alone." He frowned and didn't move. "Layla, what's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Are you angry?" I glanced at him, then looked away again. "Grant, I'm not angry. Anger requires expectation, and I have nothing left." Grant stayed in the hospital for less than 20 minutes before Rose called. "Grant, I'm so scared alone. Please come back soon." He covered the receiver with his hand and glanced at me, as if waiting for me to tell him to leave. I closed my eyes and said nothing. He stood up, whispered "I'll be back," leaned down and brushed his lips against my forehead, then walked away. His footsteps faded down the hallway. The woman in the next bed was holding her mother-in-law's hand, and the older woman was saying "You did so well" through tears. I turned my face to the window. Below the hospital was a busy main road, streetlights illuminating the pavement. A nurse came in to change my glanced at the empty room, said nothing, and left after finishing. The baby slept in the bassinet, occasionally making small cooing sounds before settling again. I stared at his little face for a long time, thinking about one thing. That recording was still on my phone, every word of what Grant had said clear as day. "Layla, can you stop faking stomach pain?" I picked up my phone, listened to the recording 3 times, then sent it to a contact saved as attorney Victoria Reed. Victoria had been Grant's company in-house counsel. but she was also someone I'd secretly hired before we got married. She replied quickly. Just 2 words. Received. I put my phone back under the pillow and closed my eyes. The baby cooed again, soft as a kitten. Grant. You thought the fireworks tonight were beautiful. Let me tell you something much more beautiful is coming. Mrs. Voss drove me home from the hospital. Grant said he had an important meeting at the company and couldn't come. Mrs. Voss was a dignified woman, dressed neatly. Her hair pulled back perfectly. She helped me into the car, her face showing restrained kindness. She didn't ask where Grant was, and I didn't mention him. Halfway home, she suddenly spoke. Layla, have you thought of a name for the baby yet? Not yet. I thought of a nickname for him, Noah, because even though there was trouble the day he was born, he arrived safe and sound. I looked down at the baby in my arms. He was staring up at me with big, dark eyes, as if he were paying close attention. Okay, Noah. Mrs. Voss pressed her lips together and said nothing else for a moment. Then she spoke softly. Layla. I know what happened that night. I didn't respond. I'm not here to make excuses for him. What he did that night, there's no way I can defend it. Her hand tightened on the steering wheel. I just want you to know that whatever decision you make, I'll support you. I held the baby a little tighter. Mrs. Voss, do you mean that? She stopped at a red light and turned to look at me. Something flashed in her eyes, and she said firmly, I mean it. I looked into her eyes and said my second sentence. Good. The light turned green, and the car started moving again. Mrs. Voss didn't ask any more questions, and I didn't say anything else. The baby yawned in my arms and closed his eyes again. I pressed my cheek to his forehead, and slowly, a decision settled in my heart. When we arrived at the Voss residence, Rose was waiting at the door. She was 18, wearing a floral dress Grant had bought her, holding a stuffed rabbit. Her face had that practiced gentle expression she'd perfected. Welcome home. Layla, you must be exhausted. I got out of the car. Mrs. Voss went to park, and the postpartum caregiver helped me inside. Rose stood in place, not offering to help, just smiling sweetly. Layla, the baby is so cute. Can I hold him? He's just born. His immune system is weak. He can't be held by just anyone. Rose's smile faltered for a second, then quickly recovered. Right, I'm being silly. Thank you for telling me. I didn't look at her and walked straight inside. The caregiver settled the baby in his bassinet, and I sat in the room for a while. Grant sent a message saying he'd be home tonight, followed by a question mark. As if testing my reaction, I didn't reply. I pulled a thick manila envelope from the storage box under the bed. The contents inside I'd been preparing for 3 months. Copies of the house purchase agreement, screenshots of Grant's bank statements, the equity structure chart of his 3 companies, and a complete list of marital property that Victoria had helped me put together. I resealed the envelope and slid it under the mattress, moving slowly, as if I were just doing ordinary housework. The baby cooed in his bassinet. I went over to look at him. His eyes were closed, his mouth moving as if he were eating something. Noah, I whispered, your daddy went to watch fireworks that night. He said they were beautiful. The baby didn't respond, sleeping deeply. When you're older, Mommy will take you to see something much more beautiful. I dimmed the lights and sat in the darkness for a long time. Grant came home at 9 o'clock that night, smelling faintly of alcohol. His face relaxed after a night of entertaining. He pushed open the bedroom door, saw me sitting under the lamp breastfeeding, paused, then walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out to touch the baby's face. I didn't move away, but his hand hung in midair, not falling. Layla, you're still angry. I'm not angry. Then what is it? Nothing. He frowned, his voice lowering. You want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. That night was my mistake. I shouldn't have turned off my phone. Mistake. I tasted the word in my mouth, then turned the baby to face the other way and said nothing. Grant probably thought I was just being stubborn. He sighed and softened his tone. Noah, right. Mom picked the nickname. It's nice. I'm wrapping up a big project right now. Once this is over, I'll spend more time with you too. He said a few more things, and I just hummed in response. Eventually he stopped talking, picked up his phone from the nightstand, and started scrolling. A few minutes later, I heard him chuckle softly, the kind of laugh you make when you see something that makes you happy. I looked down, focusing on the baby in my arms. When I finished breastfeeding, I put the baby back in his bassinet, lay down, and closed my eyes. Grant probably thought I was asleep. He rolled over, and the light from his phone shone through my eyelids. I heard him send a voice message in a low voice. "Rose, are you asleep? Did the little pastry get delivered to your room? Does the night nurse know?" A voice message came back, also quiet, but I could still hear the thin, high sound through the receiver. I didn't try to listen, just stared at the ceiling. Grant whispered a few more replies, then put his phone away, rolled over to face away from me, and fell asleep quickly. I lay next to him, eyes open, thinking about what I had to do tomorrow. The next morning, I called Victoria. She arrived while Grant was already at the company. Rose was still sleeping upstairs, and Mrs. Voss was sitting in the living room drinking tea. When she saw Victoria come in, she stood up, set her teacup down, and nodded at me. I took the manila envelope from under the mattress and placed it on the coffee table. Victoria opened it and looked through everything, then looked up at me. "The materials are complete. I've been preparing them for 3 months." Mrs. Voss looked down, was silent for a moment, then spoke. "Of the 3 houses in Grant's name, 2 are registered to him personally, and 1 was bought after the marriage. I know people at the bank. I can help you get that one transferred over." Victoria glanced at Mrs. Voss, then turned back to me. "Mrs. Voss, are you sure about this?" Mrs. Voss set her teacup down, her voice steady. "I'm sure. I looked at these 2 women, one the lawyer I'd hired, one my husband's mother, sitting on opposite ends of the same coffee table, neither showing any excess emotion." "Why?" I asked Mrs. Voss. She looked at me for a long time before answering. "Because that night I called him too." I froze. "I told him to go back to the hospital. I told him you were losing a dangerous amount of blood, that he needed to come immediately. He said he'd wait until after the fireworks." The living room was silent for a few seconds. "He's my son," Mrs. Voss said, her voice as calm as if she were talking about someone else. "But what he did that night, there's no excuse for it." I looked down, my fingertips pressing against the manila envelope. The corners were worn from being opened and closed so many times. I'd known this day would come 3 months ago, which is why I'd started preparing. But now that it was actually here, I still sat quietly for a long time before lifting my hand and nodding at Victoria. "Let's start." For the next 2 weeks, life at the Voss residence seemed exactly the same as usual. Grant went to the company every day and came home at night. He occasionally bought a few cans of imported formula for the baby, his attitude mild enough, like a husband who knew he'd messed up and was trying to make up for it with silence. Rose came and went as she pleased. Grant had bought her a new electric scooter for running errands, and she'd thrown her arms around him to thank him, then turned to me and said sweetly, "Thank you for being so understanding, Layla." Mrs. Voss drank her tea and looked after the baby as always, talking to me the same way, but there was something deep in her smile that she kept hidden. I breastfed when I needed to, did my postpartum rehabilitation exercises, and checked my phone every night before bed for updates from Victoria. One said, "Account processed." Another, "Nominee shareholding transferred." Another, "House transferred and registered. Please check documents." I read each one and replied with a simple good. Then I'd put my phone down, turn off the lights, and lie awake in the dark listening to Grant's steady breathing. Sometimes the baby would wake up in the middle of the night and coo, and I'd get up to feed him. Grant never rolled over once, sleeping soundly through everything. On the 12th day, Victoria sent her last message. "Everything is in place, ready to proceed at any time." I replied, "Wait 1 more week." That was 8 days before Grant's company's stock exchange listing bell ringing ceremony. Grant had built this company over 7 years before I married him. It was a mid-sized architecture firm with fewer than 200 employees, well known locally but barely a blip on the national radar. After we got married, I'd quietly transferred the money my mother had left me into the company's account. Grant knew I had the money, but he didn't know when I'd transferred it. It was the month the company's cash flow was at its most dangerous. A month later, The company pulled through. Grant had said over dinner that we'd gotten lucky, that we'd dodged a bullet. I'd said nothing. Since then, the company had grown steadily, and this year it was finally going public. Grant had hired a top investment firm as the cornerstone investor, and when the news broke, financial media covered it extensively across the industry. That night, Grant had opened a good bottle of wine at home. Poured 2 glasses, one for Rose, one for me. I'd looked at how he'd placed the glasses, smiled, drunk mine, and said nothing. But that night, I'd sent Victoria a message. I want to be at the bell ringing ceremony. She'd replied, got it, I'll arrange it. The day of the bell ringing was sunny. A long line of cars was parked outside the stock exchange, and reporters stood with their equipment. All the key investors and company executives were there. Grant was wearing a dark suit, looking taller than usual. Standing next to his co-founder Mark Coleman, both had that look of suppressed excitement that comes after years of waiting for something big. Rose was there too, wearing a dress Grant had his secretary pick out especially for her. She stood in the crowd, looking up at Grant with shining eyes. I stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, holding Noah in my arms. Victoria stood next to me. Grant didn't see me. He was being ushered up the steps by a group of people, photographers following close behind. Shutters clicking rapidly, the host started announcing the ceremony proceedings, and the people on stage took their seats. The camera panned to the key investors. Just then, someone in the crowd called out, Mr. Voss, isn't that Lila over there? Grant turned his head. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. He froze for a second, then walked down the steps, through the crowd, and stood in front of me. His voice was low. What are you doing here? The baby's so small, why did you bring him here? I pushed my hat back slightly and looked at him. Mr. Voss, going public is a big occasion. I came to witness it. Is that not allowed? He frowned, his gaze falling on the baby in my arms, then lifted to see Victoria standing next to me. His face changed slightly. Who is she? Victoria took a stack of documents from her briefcase and handed them to Grant with both hands. Good morning, Mr. Voss. I'm attorney Victoria Reed, representing Ms. Lila Hart. This is the divorce settlement agreement. According to the terms, all marital community property has been divided, and all asset transfers have been completed and legally registered. Please review and sign. The crowd fell silent for a beat. Then all eyes turned toward us. Grant stared at the documents, not taking them. He looked up at me, his voice pale. Layla, what have you done? Everything I've done is in the documents. Mr. Voss, read through them carefully. Somehow, the photographers had all turned their cameras toward us. Shutters still clicking. Grant snatched the documents and flipped through them rapidly. When he got to the property list, his face drained of all color. He looked up, his voice so quiet only we could hear. How did you know about that account? I didn't, I said, but Attorney Reed did. He looked at Victoria, who spoke calmly. Mr. Voss, Ms. Hart retained me 3 months ago to conduct a full legal assessment of your marital property. We have thoroughly reviewed your financial situation. Mark Coleman came down the steps and leaned over to whisper what's going on, but Grant didn't answer. He held the documents, reading and rereading them. This house has already been transferred. Yes. These shares the been processed too. Yes. This isn't legal. You had no right to touch his property, Grant said, his voice starting to shake. He turned to Victoria. What authority do you have? Victoria took a second stack of documents from her briefcase and placed them in Grant's hands. This is a power of attorney signed by Mr. Voss 3 years ago. At the time, your company was facing a cash flow crisis. To secure financing, Mr. Voss granted partial disposal rights over marital community property to Ms. Hart's legal representative. The power of attorney was legally notarized and remains valid to this day. Grant stared at the power of attorney for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Mark glanced at it, his expression complicated, and took a step back. The host on stage was asking into the microphone if Mr. Voss needed a moment. The reporters held their cameras higher. Grant finally looked up, staring straight at me, his voice low. Layla, when did you start planning this? 3 months ago. I said. Before Noah was born. He stared at me, then glanced at the baby in my arms. Noah was staring up at him with big, dark eyes, looked at him for a second, then turned his head away. As if he weren't interested. You wanted a family member to sign the surgery consent form, I said, taking a folded piece of paper from my pocket and unfolding it to hand to him. This is a copy. The original is with Attorney Reed. It was the emergency surgery consent form from that night. Only my name was in the signature box. The family member signature line was blank. Grant looked down at the paper and said nothing for a very long time. Rose had somehow made her way to the edge of the crowd. She looked at Grant, then at me, and that practiced gentle expression on her face finally cracked. The host called for the third time, saying it was time to ring the bell and asking if Mr. Voss was ready. Grant stood frozen in place, clutching the 2 stacks of documents and the copy of the surgery consent form, not moving. All the media cameras were pointed directly at us now. Grant, I said calmly, you've worked 7 years for this. Everyone up there is waiting for you. Go. He looked up at me. Take the documents home and read them. You'll sign what needs to be signed. I pulled my hat down over my eyes, turned, and walked out of the crowd, holding Noah. Behind me, I could hear murmurs, the click of shutters, and the host's voice saying, Mr. Voss, please take your place. I didn't look back. Victoria caught up to me, walking beside me, and whispered. All the media got it on camera. I know. Tonight's financial news is going to be very interesting. Noah reached up with one small hand and grabbed the collar of my shirt. I looked down at him. He was staring up at me, blinking slowly, as if asking what was wrong. It's okay, I whispered. Mommy just finished delivering a gift that was long overdue. The news spread faster than I'd expected. By that afternoon, several financial accounts had posted stories with headlines ranging from Mr. Voss served divorce papers on stage at his own IPO to insider reveals wife's revenge after being left to give birth alone to assets transferred days before listing what really happened. Grant called repeatedly, but I didn't answer any of them. Mrs. Voss sat in the living room, looking at her phone, her expression calm, occasionally sipping her tea as if she were watching a play whose ending she already knew. Rose called once too. I didn't answer that either. In the evening, Mark Coleman showed up at the house personally. He sat in the living room, looking harried, saying Grant was in bad shape, that going public was the company's 7-year dream, that I could negotiate whatever terms I wanted. Just don't make this any bigger than it already is. I poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. Mr. Coleman, the terms are clearly written in the documents. There's nothing to negotiate, but the asset transfer process legal says there might be issues. It might not hold up in court. Then let him sue me, I said, when we go to court. The recording of that emergency phone call can be submitted as evidence too. Mark picked up his teacup, put it down, picked it up again, then put it down again. That recording from the night you had the baby. Yes. He was silent for a moment, then stood up and said he understood. That he'd go talk to Grant. As I walked him to the door, Mrs. Voss came out of the kitchen with a bowl of soup and set it on the table. When the door closed, she sat back down and looked at me. Mark was just testing the waters. He didn't come to actually negotiate. I know. Grant will probably come himself tomorrow. If he does, I'll say the same thing. The terms are in the documents. Nothing to negotiate. Mrs. Voss looked down at her teacup for a moment, then said, Layla, you've been carrying this all alone. You've been so strong. I didn't say anything. Just picked up the bowl of soup and took a sip. The baby cooed in the other room, and Mrs. Voss stood up to go check on him. I sat alone in the living room. It was dark outside now, and the streetlights below were coming on one by one. My phone lit up with a message from Victoria. Contacted media outlets. Ready to release the recording at any time. I replied good. Put my phone face down on the table, and finished the rest of the soup. Grant showed up the next morning. He wasn't wearing the sharp suit or the relaxed smile from the day before. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept all night. His hair messy. He stood in the living room doorway, looking at me with a complicated expression I couldn't read. We need to talk. Talk about what? About those documents. He lowered his voice. Layla, Do you realize what you've done? Those shares, those accounts, you didn't say a word to me before you touched them. I touched what was legally mine from our marital property. You signed that power of attorney yourself. I signed it because the company was in crisis, not so you could use it against me like this. The power of attorney doesn't specify any restrictions on use. Attorney Red confirmed that. Grant stared at me, his voice rising. You put that money into the company, why didn't you tell me? If you had, I never would have. Never would have what? I asked calmly. Grant. Finish that sentence carefully. He stopped talking. The living room was silent for a few seconds. Mrs. Voss sat in the corner, saying nothing, holding her teacup but not drinking. I know you're hurt, Grant said, softening his tone. What I did that night was wrong. I'm sorry. I really am. But this isn't the way to solve our problems. What problems? Our problems. Between us. There are no problems between us, I said. They were solved 3 months ago. He froze, looking at me as if he didn't understand what I'd just said. Grant. I'm not negotiating with you, I said, picking up a copy of the divorce settlement agreement and placing it in front of him. This is the agreement. I have only one condition. Noah stays with me. Child support is as written in the agreement. What you and Rose do is none of my business. Grant looked down at the document, his fingers pressing into the paper. You're taking Noah away from the Voss family. Yes. Layla. Be reasonable. He's only a month old. Where are you going to go with a baby alone? That's my business. You have no family left. Do you know how hard it is to raise a child alone? I know, I said. It's easier than staying here. Grant closed his eyes, then opened them and looked at me for a long time. Finally, he turned to Mrs. Voss. Mom, say something. Mrs. Voss slowly set her teacup down and looked at Grant. I think Lila's terms are reasonable. Grant froze as if he'd been struck. For the first time in 2 days, a real crack appeared in his expression. Mom, when your company was in trouble, Lila put every penny her mother left her into it. Mrs. Voss said, her voice flat. She didn't tell you because she thought you were one. What was yours was hers. What was hers was yours. She didn't think she needed to say anything. Grant was silent. Then Rose came into this house, and Lila put up with it for 3 years. Mrs. Voss continued. That night she was in labor. She called you 5 times, and you asked her what she was pretending for. Mom, I didn't know how serious it was. I told you how serious it was when I called you. Grant pressed his lips together, glanced at Mrs. Voss, then looked away. The room was quiet for so long we could hear the baby cooing from the hallway. Finally, Grant stood up, picked up the divorce settlement agreement, and said nothing. He walked to the door, paused, and said over his shoulder, You kept that power of attorney on purpose. Didn't you? Yes, I said. I've had it since 3 years ago. He was silent for a few seconds, then pushed the door open and left. Mrs. Voss picked up her teacup and took a sip. He'll sign it in the next couple of days, she said. I went to get the baby. He was staring up at me, reaching out to grab my finger with his tiny hand, holding on tight. Noah, I whispered. We're leaving. We're going to live somewhere new. I hear it's nice. The baby made a gurgling sound and held onto my finger tighter. The sun was shining brightly through the window, filling the room with white light. The signed divorce settlement agreement was delivered 3 days later. Grant sent Mark with it. He didn't come himself. The signature was real, on every page. No changes made. As Mark handed it to me, he started to say Grant actually but didn't finish. I showed him to the door. Victoria finished all the paperwork that afternoon. When she came out of the courthouse, she handed me a stack of documents and said, It's done. Thank you. You're welcome, she said, pausing. Layla, you're the most prepared client I've ever had. I put the documents in my bag. I knew this day would come eventually. I just had to wait for the right time. The bell ringing ceremony. That was the day he could least afford to lose those assets. And the day a public scandal would hurt him the most. I said, pick the right time, and he has no choice but to sign. Victoria looked at me for a moment, then nodded and said nothing else. I walked out of the law firm into bright sunlight. The parking lot was so bright it made me squint. I buckled Noah into his car seat, started the engine, and drove toward a new address. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment I bought 3 months ago with the money my mother had left me. It was on a high floor with a balcony that overlooked the riverfront. I hadn't told anyone about it, not Grant, not Mrs. Voss, not even Victoria until recently. Only me. The day I bought it, I stood in the empty apartment listening to construction noise outside, looking at the tape marks left on the floor by the previous tenant. I stood there for a long time, thinking the same thing. If he'd come back after those 5 calls, things might have been different, but he hadn't. So this apartment was for that outcome. I unbuckled Noah from his car seat and carried him out onto the balcony of our new home. The wind blew off the river, carrying the smell of water. The baby looked up at the blue sky and made gurgling sounds, as if he were talking. "See that?" I said to him. "This is where we're going to live from now on." He gurgled again, as if answering me. I looked down and smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had since this whole mess began. The first few weeks of our new life were quieter than I'd expected. No one came to cause trouble. Grant stopped calling entirely. Rose disappeared. And even the financial media coverage died down, sinking into the endless sea of information. Only Mrs. Voss came to visit Noah occasionally. She always brought food, sat for a while, played with the baby, and talked to me. She never mentioned Grant or Rose, as if they'd never existed. Once I asked her what had happened to Rose. She went back to the orphanage, she said calmly. Did Grant agree to that? He has bigger things to worry about now. The regulators are asking questions about that asset transfer, and he's swamped. Mrs. Voss took a sip of tea. Rose was just a pawn he thought he could use to control me and you. Now that the pawn's useless, why keep her around? I didn't say anything. Mrs. Voss looked at me. Do you feel sorry for her? No, I said. I just think she was a sad person who chose the wrong path. She was. Mrs. Voss said. But sad people who choose the wrong path still have to face the consequences. I refilled her teacup. We sat on the balcony together, Noah sleeping in his bassinet. The wind blew off the river, making the baby's small clothes hanging on the line flutter softly. Mrs. Voss set her teacup down and looked at me for a moment. Layla, your mother passed away early, but she told me something once that I've never forgotten. I want to tell you today. What did she say? She said, keep your money in your own hands, keep half your heart for yourself, and always keep your own 2 feet on solid ground. I looked out at the riverfront and was silent for a moment. She always knew. She was a wise woman. Mrs. Voss said, I should have told you this earlier. That was my mistake. It's okay, I said. I learned it eventually. Mrs. Voss smiled, the most relaxed expression I'd seen on her face in a long time. Noah cooed in his bassinet. I stood up to check on him. He was awake, waving his arms and legs, and when he saw me looking down at him, he gave me that big, innocent smile only babies can have. I stared at his little face for a long time. Noah, I whispered, I want you to remember something. Your mommy did a very foolish thing once. He smiled wider. I loved someone who didn't deserve it, I said, but that's over now. It ended today. He gurgled and reached out to grab my finger. It's just us 2 now, I said, but that's enough. The river stretched out wide in front of us, sunlight glinting off the water. 3 months after the IPO, Grant's company's stock started having problems. Not a crash, just a slow, steady decline. Every morning when I checked the financial news, his company's name was somewhere on the losers list. I didn't follow it closely, but Victoria sent me a message one day saying that according to our agreement, the founder's shares I held were now worth a significant amount and I should consider selling them. I asked her how much. She told me the number. I thought about it and said I'd hold on to them for now. She said okay. I put my phone down and went to make Noah a bottle of formula. As I ed him, I thought about the day 3 years ago when I'd transferred that money into Grant's company account. I'd sat alone in the empty bank lobby, looking at the transfer confirmation, feeling that solid, trusting sense that I was putting everything into our future together. Looking back, I'd been so naive, but that money had turned into a power of attorney, into founder's shares in the divorce settlement, into this 2-bedroom apartment, into Noah's birth bills, postpartum care, and his first can of formula. It hadn't been wasted. I ran into Mark Coleman once outside a department store. It was during the worst of the company's troubles, and he looked exhausted. He froze when he saw me, then stopped and said, "Layla, how did you think to keep that power of attorney?" "I didn't plan for this specifically," I said. "I just thought that if I was going to help him, I should get it in writing. There are too many things that can go unsaid later." Mark was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You were always the smartest person in that company." I didn't say anything, said goodbye, and continued walking. On my way home, I passed a department store window displaying baby things, rows of bassinets and strollers, brightly lit. I stood outside the window for a moment, remembering what Grant had said. "I'll take care of the baby myself." He'd said it with such sincerity that I'd believed him. Then the baby was born, and he'd shown up 6 hours later, said "Good, you're okay," and left 20 minutes after that when Rose called. Some things are true when you say them. They just don't survive what comes after. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned and continued walking home. Noah was there with Mrs. Voss, probably sleeping, or staring at the ceiling, or waving his little hands in the air. I quickened my pace. About 6 months later, Grant showed up once. It was a Sunday afternoon, and he didn't call ahead, he just rang the doorbell. I opened the door and saw him standing there. He'd lost a lot of weight, and that relaxed air he'd always had was completely gone. I didn't invite him in, just stood in the doorway. "What do you want?" "I want to see Noah." "You have visitation rights. Follow the agreement and call ahead." "Layla, I'm not here to argue about that," he said, his voice low, like he'd been holding this in for a long time. "I just want to see him, just for a minute." I was silent for a second, then stepped aside to let him in. He walked in and saw the baby in his bassinet. He stood there for a very long time, not moving. Noah was older now, able to sit up. When he saw the stranger standing in front of him, he paused, then stared at Grant curiously, studying him. Grant bent down toward the baby, his voice thick. "Noah." The baby continued staring at him, then turned his head toward me and reached out his arms. I picked him up, and he immediately buried his face in my shoulder, clinging tightly. Grant stood up straight, looked at the baby, then at me. "He doesn't know me. You haven't been around." He was silent for a moment, then sat down in the chair next to the bassinet, his hands resting on his knees, saying nothing. I stood holding the baby, also saying nothing. After a while, he spoke. "Layla, if I'd come back that night, would you still have done this?" "I don't know." "What does that mean?" "It means I can't answer that because it never happened," I said. "Grant, what happened happened. There are no do-overs." He clenched his hands into fists, then unclenched them, looking down at the floor. "I know." After another long silence, he stood up and walked to the door. He paused with his back to me. "I checked the bank records. You transferred the money on the 7th of that month." I said nothing. I was out to dinner that night. Chloe had a fever, so I left early. "I missed your calls. You moved your luggage yourself, made your own dinner reservations, and went to the bank alone the next day to transfer the money. You never asked me for anything." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought it was just extra money you had lying around." He turned his head slightly to look at me. "I'm sorry, Layla. I didn't realize then, but I do now." I looked down at the baby in my arms. He'd settled against my shoulder and was falling asleep. "Grant," I said softly, "if you'd said that 2 years ago, it might have meant something. Now, all I can think is that you're a very unfortunate man." He didn't say anything to that. He just pushed the door open and left. I stood in the doorway, listening to the elevator doors open and close. Then silence. The baby slept in my arms, his breathing light and steady. The hallway light turned on, then off again. I closed the door and walked back into the living room. I sat down on the sofa, holding the baby securely against me, leaned back, and closed my eyes. I thought about something from a long time ago. Before we got married, Grant had proposed to me at our favorite restaurant. He'd hidden the ring in dessert, and the waiter had brought it out with a big smile. Everyone around us had clapped, and Grant had knelt on the floor and said, "Layla, marry me. I'll take care of you forever." That day, I'd thought it was the best day of my life. Later I'd learned that it was just the beginning. Everything that came after was the real him. I opened my eyes and looked out at the river. The sunlight was fading, turning the water into a shimmering gold. Noah, I whispered. He didn't wake up, his breathing still light and steady. When you grow up and fall in love, find someone good, I said. Not someone rich or famous, just someone who, when things go wrong, thinks of you first. He didn't respond. Sleeping deeply, I put my hand on his back and patted him gently. The light outside faded slowly, turning the sky a deep, quiet blue. The river stretched out wide, endless in the dusk. Grant's company eventually completed its corporate restructuring at the end of the year. The stock stabilized. The media said Mr. Voss had turned crisis into opportunity, and business leaders praised his resilience. I saw the headline on my phone, swiped past it, and didn't stop. Victoria came to visit that day, bringing a document with the latest valuation of my shares. She pushed it across the table to me. Now's a good time to sell. If you want. I looked at the number. It was almost 10 times what I'd put into the company 3 years ago. Sell them, I said. All of them. Okay. Victoria made a note on the document, then looked up at me. What are you going to do with the money? I thought for a moment. My mother always wanted to visit a city she lived in when she was young. It's down south, in Charleston. There's an old town there with lots of little shops and street food. She said it was beautiful in the evening, when all the lights come on and the streets are full of people. She never got to go. No, we didn't have much money when I was little, and then when things got better, she got sick. She never made it. Victoria set her pen down and looked at me. Is the old town still there? Yes, I said. I checked. It's still there. Same name. She was silent for a moment, then said, then go. I will, I said. I'm taking Noah with me. I want to see it for her. The paperwork was finished by evening. I stood on the balcony holding Noah. He was pointing at the sky now, making gurgling sounds. I followed his finger and saw a cloud dyed bright orange by the setting sun. Is it pretty? I asked him. He gurgled and pointed toward the river. That's pretty too, I said. He laughed, that big, innocent baby laugh, and reached up to grab my collar. I looked down at his little face and smiled. The river stretched out in front of us, wide and endless. The streetlights along the waterfront were coming on one by one, stretching into the distance as far as the eye could see. Noah, I whispered. He looked up at me. We're going to be okay. He laughed again, waving his arms and legs, then grabbed my collar again, holding on tight. I held him close, standing on the balcony, watching the streetlights stretch out into the night, bright and unwavering. The news from the bell-ringing ceremony never completely died down. 6 months later, a business documentary team contacted me. They were doing a series on women in the workplace and marital rights, and they asked if I'd be willing to participate. I thought about it for 3 days, then replied that I would, but I would only tell my own story. I wouldn't comment on anyone else or label anyone. They said that was fine. The filming was on a weekday morning. They came to my apartment. Noah had just woken up and was sitting in his bassinet looking around. The director saw him and smiled quietly. I sat in a chair on the balcony, the camera across from me. Looking back now, why did you choose that exact moment to do it? Because before that day, I didn't know where I was going to go, and I didn't have everything I needed. I said, that morning, both things fell into place. I knew it was time. You prepared for 3 months. What was life like during those 3 months? On the surface, nothing changed. I breastfed, went to prenatal appointments, organized things. I paused, but every night before I went to sleep, I'd go over all the documents in my head, thinking about what I'd missed, what my next step should be. Did you ever doubt yourself? I looked at the camera for a few seconds. I had moments of doubt, but every time I did, I'd remember those 5 phone calls. I said, 5 calls. He answered every single one, but he never came. The director didn't say anything, just waited. Do you regret it now? I looked out at the river. The morning light was thin, turning the water pale white. No, I said, not even a little bit. If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently? I thought for a moment. I would have prepared sooner, I said. I should have given myself a safety net much earlier. The camera's red light was still on. The photographer didn't move. I continued. I'm not saying you should be suspicious of everyone, but you have to understand that loving someone and giving them everything is your choice. You should always keep something back, something that's yours, that you can take with you no matter what happens. What if the person is worth it? Then even better, I said. You'll never need that safety net, but it's still there, under your feet, keeping you grounded. Noah cooed from inside, probably looking for someone. I glanced toward the bedroom, and I heard Mrs. Voss's voice saying, I'm here, sweet boy. I turned back to the camera and smiled. The director said that was all, that they had enough footage, and thanked me. I said you're welcome, stood up, and went to get the baby. He'd just been calmed down by Mrs. Voss and was staring off into space. When he saw me, he reached out his arms, and I picked him up. He immediately buried his face in my shoulder, settling in comfortably. The crew packed up their equipment. One of the young women looked up at me as she was zipping her bag, as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it and just looked down again. I noticed, but I didn't ask. After they left, Mrs. Voss sat down on the sofa. What you said was very good. I said it for myself, I said, and for them, I guess. Mrs. Voss sighed and held out her arms for Noah. He looked at her for a second, then buried his face deeper in my shoulder, refusing to go. Mrs. Voss laughed. He's just like you. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. He hummed contentedly and stayed where he was. The sun was rising higher now, turning the river into a brilliant, shimmering white. Mrs. Voss, I said, I'm planning to go to Charleston next month, to that old town my mother wanted to see. I said, would you like to come with us? Mrs. Voss froze for a second, then her face broke into a warm smile. I'd love to. Good, I said. My mother never got to go. We'll go for her. Something soft crossed Mrs. Voss's face. She nodded. Yes, we'll go for her. Noah hummed against my shoulder, probably not hearing a word we said, just sleeping peacefully, his breathing light and steady against my chest. I put my hand on his back, patting him gently, and looked out at the bright, endless river stretching out in front of us, wide, open, and full of possibility. Mrs. Voss was gathering her things to leave that evening when she suddenly stopped at the door. She turned around, and I saw an expression on her face I'd never seen before, hesitation, mixed with something she'd been holding back for a long time. Layla, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I wasn't going to, but I think you deserve to know. I stood in the living room holding Noah, looking at her. Tell me. She set her bag down and stood by the shoe cabinet, not moving. Rose didn't just end up here by accident, Mrs. Voss said, her voice low. Grant went to the orphanage specifically to pick her out. He chose the youngest one, the one who'd be most dependent on him. I listened, saying nothing. His father died when he was young, and we built the company together. He was afraid I'd never give up control of the finances, so he found a way to distract me. He thought if I had someone weak to take care of, I wouldn't be watching him so closely. The living room was silent. Noah made a soft gurgling sound, and I automatically patted his back. And what about me? I asked, my voice calmer than I expected. What was his plan for me? Mrs. Voss looked straight at me. Once you had the baby would be his way of controlling you. Rose would be useless to him then. His plan was for you to stay home and raise the baby, and for Rose to be with him. I stood there, not moving, not speaking. I found out because he got drunk once and let it slip, Mrs. Voss said, her voice steady, almost too steady. That's when I realized Rose was never here because he felt sorry for her. She was just a pawn. I looked down at Noah in my arms. He was staring up at me with those big, dark eyes, reaching out to grab my finger, holding on tight, completely unaware of what I'd just heard. Mrs. Voss, I said. Yes. How long have you known this? Since that night in the hospital, she said. When he said he'd wait until after the fireworks, I knew I couldn't keep this from you anymore. If I did, you'd be the one who suffered. I stared at Noah's little face for a long time. That's why you helped me. That's why I helped you. I held the baby a little tighter, patting his back slowly, rhythmically, as if I were trying to push something out of me, or pull something in. Mrs. Voss picked up her bag and pushed the door open. She paused in the doorway. Layla, Grant is beyond saving, but you're not. The door closed. I stood alone in the living room. Outside, the river was the color of dusk. Dark and wide and endless. Noah moved in my arms. Made a soft sound, then settled his head against my shoulder and closed his eyes. I stood there, not moving. Rose was a pawn. I was the one who was supposed to have the baby. The baby was supposed to be the pawn that controlled me. Grant, you'd planned this whole chess game 7 years ago, but you forgot one thing. I know how to play chess too. And I made the first move. The wind blew through the balcony, making the baby's small clothes flutter softly for a moment. Then settle again. I leaned down and whispered something against Noah's forehead. Something only he and I could hear. Come on, let's go eat. He hummed against my shoulder, his breathing light and steady, as if saying yes. We went to Old Town in Charleston when Noah was 9 months old. Mrs. Voss booked a room at a historic boutique right in the middle of the Old Town. It had wooden stairs, and when you opened the window, you could see the cobblestone streets below. In the evening, all the lights came on, warm gas lanterns and twinkling string lights strung between the old brick buildings, turning the whole street into something out of a dream. I stood at the end of the street, Noah in his stroller, looking up at the lights. Mrs. Voss stood next to me, looking at the street for a long time. It's exactly how she described it. Evening, all the lights on, streets full of people. Mrs. Voss looked down at Noah. We brought her grandson with us. That counts, right? I didn't say anything. Just grabbed the stroller handle and started walking down the street. There were food stalls on both sides, the smell of fried food, sweet pastries, grilled skewers, all mixing together into that warm, busy smell that only old towns have. Noah sat in his stroller, sniffing the air, looking around at everything, pointing at different stalls and babbling in his own baby language. I stopped at a stall selling mochi, bought one, and took a bite. It was sweet and soft and warm. I blew on it to cool it down, then continued walking. Mrs. Voss walked beside me, not buying anything, just looking at the stalls, her expression softening as she took everything in. Halfway down the street, there was a huge old live oak tree draped in Spanish moss. Its roots pushed up through the cobblestones, and its branches spread wide, holding the strings of lanterns that swayed gently in the wind. I stopped under the tree and took out my phone. I took a picture, the live oak tree, the lanterns, the lit-up street, and Noah in his stroller looking up at the lights. I saved the photo in a new album, titled, For You. Then I put my phone away and continued pushing the stroller down the street. Mrs. Voss walked beside me, gently bumping my shoulder with hers, saying nothing. Noah pointed at a candy sculpture stall and babbled loudly. I pushed the stroller over, knelt down, and got him a rabbit-shaped candy sculpture. He held it in both hands, stared at it for a long time, then tried to put it in his mouth. I stopped him, saying he couldn't bite it yet, and he protested loudly, then went back to staring at it seriously. Mrs. Voss laughed out loud. I looked up at her and smiled too. The Old Town was long. We walked for almost 2 hours. By the time we reached the end, it was completely dark. The streetlights illuminated the cobblestones, and Noah had fallen asleep in his stroller, still clutching the rabbit candy. A little bit of it melted and stuck to his palm. I knelt down, gently took the candy from his hand, threw it in the trash, wiped his hand clean, and pulled the blanket up a little higher around his shoulders. Mrs. Voss stood beside me, speaking softly. Come on, let's go back. I pushed the stroller out of the Old Town and into the night. Our footsteps echoed on the cobblestones. Ahead of us was Mrs. Voss's back, walking slowly and steadily. I followed behind her, pushing Noah, and as I walked, I suddenly felt something shift inside me. It wasn't the end of my marriage, or the end of Grant, or the end of all those years of quiet endurance. It was the end of that version of myself, the one who thought you had to give everything to be loved. That version of me died right here, right now. Beneath my feet was smooth cobblestone. Streetlights lined the road ahead, stretching endlessly into the night, their light bright and unwavering. I looked down at the sleeping baby in the stroller. He was smiling in his sleep, probably dreaming about the lights in the Old Town. Noah, I whispered. He didn't wake up. His breathing steady and calm. The road ahead is good. The street lights kept going, stretching further than the eye could see, bright and certain, never going out.